July 18, 1933, 11:47 a.m. Bo Weinberg, Dutch Schultz's most feared enforcer, cornered Stephanie St. Clair outside Abyssinian Baptist Church and told 200 witnesses she was just a woman in a man's game. By 3:17 a.m. he was gone. Forever. July 18, 1933, 11:47 a.m. Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street and 7th Avenue stood as Harlem's spiritual anchor. Every Sunday, its doors opened to 2,000 souls seeking grace, community, and respite from a world that gave Black Americans little of either. Stephanie St. Clair sat in her usual spot, third row aisle seat, wearing a tailored navy dress with fur collar, triple-strand pearl necklace, and a hat that cost more than most Harlem families earned in a month. Not for vanity. For visibility. Because when Stephanie attended church, Harlem saw success. Saw a Caribbean immigrant who'd arrived with $10 and built an empire. Saw proof that intelligence and strategy could overcome every obstacle America placed in the path of a Black woman. The service had been powerful. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr. preached about David and Goliath. About the underestimated defeating the mighty. About faith backed by action. Stephanie listened, smiled slightly. She'd been living that sermon for 21 years. 11:45 a.m. The congregation filed out through the grand entrance, shaking hands, embracing, making plans for Sunday dinner. Stephanie moved with them, greeting neighbors, asking about children, pressing folded bills into the hands of families she knew were struggling. This was her Harlem. Her community. And she protected it with the same fierce devotion she'd once reserved for survival. She descended the church steps into bright July sunlight. That's when she saw them. 4 white men. Expensive suits that didn't quite hide the violence underneath. Standing at the base of the steps like they owned the sidewalk, the street, the air itself. Bo Weinberg stood in front. Stephanie knew him by reputation. Everyone in New York's underworld knew Bo Weinberg. Dutch Schultz's new top enforcer. The man who'd stepped into Vincent Mad Dog Call's blood-soaked shoes after Call got gunned down in a phone booth on West 23rd Street in February 1932. Weinberg was maybe 35. Broad-shouldered. Scar running from his left ear to his jawline. Eyes that had watched men die and felt nothing. He smiled when he saw Stephanie. Behind her, the congregation slowed. Conversations died. 200 people on those church steps suddenly understood something was about to happen. Stephanie stopped 3 steps from the bottom. Eye level with Weinberg now despite his height advantage. Her expression didn't change. Composed. Curious even. Mississippi St. Clair, Weinberg said. Loud enough for everyone to hear. That was the point. Beautiful service. All that talk about David and Goliath. He gestured around at the watching crowd. But you know what the Reverend forgot to mention? Sometimes Goliath wins. Stephanie said nothing. Waited. Weinberg stepped closer. Mr. Schultz asked me to deliver a message. Personal-like, in front of your people, so there's no confusion. He paused, let the moment build. Harlem belongs to Dutch Schultz now. The numbers, the territory, all of it. You've had a nice run, I'll give you that. Impressive he smiled wider. For someone like you. The insult hung there. Coded but clear. For a woman. For a Black woman. For an immigrant woman who had the audacity to believe she belonged in a man's world. Still, Stephanie said nothing. Weinberg continued, emboldened by her silence. You got 48 hours to shut down your operation. Transfer your runners. Walk away clean. Mr. Schultz is being generous, considering. He leaned in closer, voice dropping but still audible. Because here's the truth, lady, you're playing at business in a man's game. You should stick to what women know. Cooking. Cleaning. Staying out of the way. Behind Stephanie, someone gasped. A man, one of her runners, started forward. Stephanie raised one hand slightly. He stopped. The congregation watched. Waited. Prayed maybe, that their queen would respond with the fury this insult deserved. But Stephanie St. Clair didn't become Harlem's most powerful operator by reacting the way people expected. She looked at Bo Weinberg for 5 full seconds. Her face revealed nothing. No anger. No fear. No wounded pride. Then she spoke. 5 words. Come. Measured. With the slight Martinique accent that 21 years in Harlem hadn't fully erased. I'll remember you said that. That was all. Weinberg laughed. Loud mocking. You do that, sweetheart. 48 hours. He turned to his men, still laughing. They walked away, disappeared around the corner onto 7th Avenue. The congregation remained frozen, unsure what had just happened. Whether their queen had been humiliated, or whether something else was unfolding that they couldn't yet see. Stephanie descended the final steps. Walked to her car, a black Cadillac parked at the curb. Her driver, Marcus, opened the door. His face showed the fury she wasn't displaying. "Mississippi St. Clair?" he started. 409 Edgecombe, she said simply. "The apartment office." She slid into the back seat. The door closed. The Cadillac pulled away from Abyssinian Baptist Church, heading toward Sugar Hill. Inside, alone finally, Stephanie opened her handbag. Removed a small leather notebook. Wrote 3 things. Bo Weinberg. July 18, 11:47 a.m. Public insult, church steps. She checked her watch. 11:52 a.m. 15 hours and 25 minutes until 3:17 a.m. Plenty of time. The Cadillac moved through Sunday Harlem. Families walking home from church, children playing on stoops, the sweet smell of Sunday dinners cooking through open windows. Her Harlem. Her community. Bo Weinberg had just made 2 fatal mistakes. First, he'd underestimated her because she was a woman. Second, he'd humiliated her in front of the people she protected. Stephanie closed the notebook. Returned it to her handbag. Gazed out at the passing streets. By the time the sun rose tomorrow, Bo Weinberg would understand exactly what kind of game he'd entered, and who'd been playing it longer. To understand why Bo Weinberg's church steps insult was already his death sentence, you had to understand 2 things: who Stephanie St. Clair was by July 1933, and who Bo Weinberg thought he was. One of them had built power through 21 years of strategic brilliance. The other had inherited violence and mistaken it for strength. Stephanie St. Clair arrived in New York Harbor on March 12, 1912. 26 years old. $10 in her pocket. A 6th-grade education from a Martinique schoolhouse where French colonizers taught black children to read just enough to follow orders, but not enough to question authority. Stephanie had learned to question everything. She'd watched French administrators walk through her mother's laundry business in Fort-de-France like the air itself owed them deference. Watched local merchants bow and scrape for customers who treated them like servants in their own country. Watched the whole architecture of colonialism convince people their station was permanent, unchangeable, divinely ordained. Stephanie decided she'd never bow to anyone. So she saved every franc, bought passage on a steamship, and crossed the Atlantic with one clear understanding: power wasn't given. It was taken. Carefully. Strategically. With patience and precision. Harlem in 1912 was possibility incarnate. Black families escaping Southern terror. Caribbean immigrants like herself seeking new futures. People building businesses, churches, jazz clubs, literary circles. The beginning of what would become the Harlem Renaissance. The sense that black excellence was constructing itself in real time despite every obstacle white America could manufacture. Stephanie found work cleaning houses in white neighborhoods during the day. Observed everything at night. She noticed the numbers racket. An illegal lottery where people bet pennies on 3-digit combinations, hoping for payouts that could change lives. Simple. Profitable. And in 1912 Harlem, run almost entirely by white operators who extracted wealth from black neighborhoods without reinvesting a single dollar. Stephanie saw the opportunity, the inefficiency, the disrespect. By 1920 she was running her own operation. Start small. 1 block. 5 runners. Pay them better than white operators. Pay out winnings honestly, every single time even when it hurt. Build trust. Build reputation. Let word spread organically. By 1923 she controlled 30 blocks. By 1926 42 runners worked for her across Lenox Avenue, 7th Avenue, 8th Avenue. By 1930 she was clearing $200,000 annually, nearly $3 million in future dollars, from an operation that employed Harlem residents, paid fair wages, and put money back into the community. She wasn't just running numbers. She was building infrastructure. Economic independence. Hope. Every Sunday she sat 3rd row at Abyssinian Baptist Church, donated more than anyone and made sure the congregation understood. Work for Stephanie St. Clair, you got protection, fair pay, respect. In a Depression-era Harlem where jobs paid nothing and white bosses fired black workers first, Stephanie's operation wasn't just gambling. It was survival. By July 1933, Stephanie St. Clair controlled the most profitable numbers empire in Harlem. She had 43 runners, 6 betting parlors, information networks that reached into police precincts, city hall, and newspaper offices. She knew everything happening in Harlem before most people knew it themselves. She also employed Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy had started as her enforcer in 1930. Smart, strategic, loyal. When runners got robbed, Bumpy handled it. When rival operators tried poaching territory, Bumpy delivered messages. But Stephanie never relied solely on muscle. Bumpy was one tool among many. Her real weapons sat in filing cabinets. Evidence of police corruption, documentation of mob activities, witness statements, bank records. Information was leverage. Leverage was power. Power was survival. She'd been fighting Dutch Schultz since 1931. Arthur Flegenheimer, known as Dutch Schultz, was everything Stephanie wasn't. Violent, impulsive, ruled by ego. A white Jewish gangster from the Bronx who'd built his empire on bootlegging during Prohibition, then expanded into labor racketeering and numbers operations. By 1931, Schultz looked north to Harlem. Saw black neighborhoods generating hundreds of thousands in numbers revenue. Decided he wanted it. He sent men. Stephanie sent evidence to newspapers. He threatened runners. Stephanie moved operations, created redundancies. He tried intimidation. Stephanie gathered documentation of his bribes to police captains, leaked it to the Amsterdam News, forced investigations that made his Harlem operations too high profile to sustain. They'd fought to two stalemates. Schultz couldn't break her. Stephanie couldn't eliminate him. Uncomfortable equilibrium. Then Vincent "Mad Dog" Call died. Vincent Call had been Schultz's most feared enforcer until they had a falling out in 1931. Call went independent, started his own operation, became Schultz's most dangerous rival. Mad, violent, unpredictable. Responsible for the death of a 5-year-old child in a botched hit that earned him the nickname Baby Killer. February 8, 1932. 12:30 a.m. Vincent Call walked into a drugstore phone booth on West 23rd Street to make a call. Someone knew he'd be there. Someone had been waiting. A car pulled up. Thompson's submachine gun emerged from the window. 15 bullets shredded the phone booth. Call died instantly. Dutch Schultz threw a party that lasted 3 days. And he promoted Bo Weinberg. Bo Weinberg was born Abraham Weinberg in 1905, Hell's Kitchen. Grew up watching his father work 18-hour days in a garment factory for wages that barely covered rent. Learned early that legitimate work was a trap, that real money came from taking what you wanted and ensuring everyone was too terrified to take it back. By 16 he was running with Schultz's crew. By 20 he'd killed his first man, a rival bootlegger who'd tried muscling in on Schultz's Bronx territory. Clean kill. No witnesses. No remorse. By 28 after Call's death, he was Schultz's top lieutenant. Weinberg believed in 3 things: reputation, violence, and the natural order of power. Reputation meant people feared you before you had to demonstrate why. Violence meant you delivered on that fear swiftly, publicly, memorably. And the natural order meant men, white men specifically, ran criminal enterprises. Women existed in auxiliary roles. Girlfriends. Madams. Certainly not controlling multi-block numbers operations generating 6 figures annually. The fact that Stephanie St. Clair violated this natural order meant, in Weinberg's logic, that her success was temporary. An anomaly. A correction waiting to happen. He'd made that correction his personal mission. In the 6 months since becoming Schultz's top enforcer, Weinberg had disappeared 3 operators who defied Schultz's expansion attempts. 1 found in the Hudson River. 1 never found at all. 1 discovered in a Bronx warehouse with a brutality that served as message to everyone else. Weinberg's reputation grew. His confidence inflated. His belief in the inevitability of his dominance became unshakable. Which was why he'd chosen the church steps for his confrontation with Stephanie. Public humiliation. Maximum visibility. Force her into either submission or violent retaliation, both of which would destroy her carefully cultivated community standing. Violent response would alienate the church-going families who saw her as protector. Submission would shatter her reputation, make her look weak, embolden other rivals. Either way, Weinberg calculated, Stephanie St. Clair would be finished. It was, he believed, strategic brilliance. What Weinberg didn't understand, what men like him never understood, was that Stephanie's power didn't come from public displays of dominance. It came from knowing things. From 21 years of building information networks that reached into every level of Harlem society. Domestics who worked in white homes and overheard conversations, police clerks who leaked arrest reports, city hall secretaries who shared political gossip, newspaper editors who appreciated corruption tips. It came from patience. From understanding that immediate retaliation was satisfying but strategically wasteful. That the appearance of calm control intimidated more effectively than rage. It came from thinking 10 steps ahead while your enemies were still celebrating step 1. Bo Weinberg stood on those church steps and delivered his humiliation, thinking he'd won. He'd actually just activated a process he couldn't see, didn't understand, and wouldn't survive. Stephanie St. Clair had built an empire by being underestimated. By letting men assume her gender meant weakness, her race meant inferiority, her immigrant status meant ignorance. And then proving, methodically and devastatingly, that they'd miscalculated. Bo Weinberg was about to become the latest lesson in that curriculum. The clock ticked forward. 15 hours remained. And in her Sugar Hill apartment, Stephanie St. Clair opened her address book and began making phone calls. July 18, 1933. 12:30 p.m. Stephanie St. Clair sat at her mahogany desk in her 6th-floor apartment at 409 Edgecombe Avenue. 3 rotary telephones lined the desk's left side. A leather-bound ledger sat open in the center. On the right, a small stack of index cards, each containing a name, a debt owed, a favor held in reserve. Outside the tall windows, Sugar Hill spread below her. Harlem's most prestigious address, where successful black doctors, lawyers, musicians, and businesspeople, legitimate and otherwise, lived in buildings with marble lobbies and doormen who remembered names. Stephanie had earned her place here. Every square foot of it. She opened her address book. Leather-bound. Monogrammed. Organized with the precision of a military operation. Names, numbers, notations written in her careful hand. Cross-referenced. Color-coded. 21 years of accumulated intelligence. Her greatest weapon. She picked up the first telephone. Hours 1 to 3. Intelligence gathering. 12:34 p.m. The first call went to Samuel Richardson. Richardson ran numbers for Stephanie on Lenox Avenue between 130th and 135th. But more importantly, his cousin worked as a clerk at the 10th Precinct in Hell's Kitchen, Schultz's territory. Samuel. Stephanie St. Clair. I need everything about Bo Weinberg. Where he drinks, where he sleeps, who he trusts, what he's been saying since this morning. 12 hours. Richardson knew better than to ask why. Yes, Mississippi St. Clair. 12 hours. She hung up. Made the second call. Marcus Williams. Her driver, but also one of her most observant watchers. He'd been at the church, seen the whole confrontation. Marcus. I need you to visit 3 locations. She rattled off addresses. 2 speakeasies on 125th Street, 1 Numbers Parlor on 142nd. Watch who comes and goes. Listen to conversations. Weinberg will be celebrating. Men who celebrate talk. I want to know what he's saying and who's listening. Third call. James Hubert at the New York Amsterdam News. Mr. Hubert. Stephanie St. Clair. I may have a story developing. About Dutch Schultz's operations in Harlem. About public intimidation tactics outside houses of worship. I'll know more by tonight. Can you hold space for tomorrow's edition? Hubert's voice carried careful interest. How confident are you in the story, Mississippi St. Clair? Very confident, Mr. Hubert. Very confident indeed. 2:15 p.m. Samuel Richardson called back early. Mississippi St. Clair. My cousin says Weinberg's been bragging all morning. Telling everyone he put the queen in her place, at Abyssinian. Says you went silent, didn't fight back, which proves you're finished. He's at Murphy's Speakeasy right now, buying rounds, acting like he already owns Harlem. Stephanie wrote, Murphy's. Celebrating. Overconfident. Where does he go at night, Samuel? Tuesday and Thursday he plays cards at a warehouse on 142nd Street near the river. Private games. High stakes. Usually gets there around 2 a.m., stays until dawn. Stephanie checked her calendar. Tuesday. Tonight. Does he go alone? Usually takes 2 or 3 men. Sometimes just 1 if he's feeling secure. Thank you, Samuel. Your cousin's information is always valuable. She paused. Make sure he understands how valuable. Translation clear. Money would reach the cousin. Loyalty maintained. Hours 4 to 7, building leverage. 3:45 p.m. Stephanie made the delicate call. Detective William Madden, 32nd Precinct. Irish cop, 24 years on the force, 15 of them taking money from various operators. Including Stephanie, though she preferred to think of their arrangement as information exchange. More importantly, Madden owed her. 1931. A jewelry store robbery on 125th Street. Police had nothing. Stephanie's networks had names, locations, stolen merchandise within 48 hours. She'd given Madden everything anonymously. He'd made the arrest. Got promoted to detective. He hadn't forgotten. Detective Madden. Stephanie St. Clair. Boss. Madden's voice carried caution. Mississippi St. Clair. How can I help you? Bo Weinberg. I need to know his schedule for tonight. Specifically, where he'll be between 2 and 4 a.m. Longer pause. Why would you need that information? Because he made a mistake this morning? And because you owed me a favor in 1931. I'm calling it in. Madden exhaled slowly. If this comes back on me? It never does, detective. You know that. I'll make inquiries. Call you back by 5:30 p.m. Marcus returned from his surveillance route. Mississippi St. Clair. Weinberg's at Murphy's, drunk loud. Telling everyone you're finished, that Schultz owns Harlem now. He's saying, Marcus hesitated. Say it, Marcus. He's saying you were too scared to even talk back. That you know your place now. That women shouldn't play men's games. Stephanie's expression didn't change. Who's listening? Half his crew. But also Tony Borello's people. Stephanie looked up sharply. Tony Borello was there? Not personally. But 3 of his men. And Miss St. Clair? Marcus leaned forward. They weren't laughing. They were watching Weinberg real careful like. Stephanie made a note. Tony Borello. Italian numbers operator. Worked independently, not aligned with Schultz. 6 months ago, Bo Weinberg had robbed one of Borello's collections. Took $4,000. Beat Borello's nephew badly enough he spent 2 weeks in Harlem hospital. Borello hadn't retaliated. Yet. Italians believed in patience. In waiting for the right moment. Stephanie smiled slightly. Perhaps she could provide that moment. 6:15 p.m. Madden called back. Weinberg plays cards Tuesday nights. Warehouse on 142nd Street between Lenox and 7th. Gets there around 2:30 a.m. Usually 3 men with him, sometimes fewer if he's drinking. Game runs until dawn. Thank you, detective. Mississippi St. Clair, whatever you're planning? I'm not planning anything, detective. I'm simply a concerned citizen gathering information. Have a pleasant evening. Hours 8 to 11, the setup. 7:30 p.m. Stephanie made 2 more calls. First, Anthony Rizzo. Mid-level operator in the Genovese family. Stephanie had helped him 2 years ago, provided information about a Dutch Schultz operation encroaching on Italian territory. Rizzo had appreciated the tip. Owed her. Mr. Rizzo. Stephanie St. Clair. I have information that might interest Mr. Borello. About Bo Weinberg. About where he'll be tonight and how vulnerable he'll be. Rizzo listened. Asked one question, why are you telling us this? Because Weinberg disrespected me this morning. Because he owes Mr. Borello money and blood. And because I prefer solving problems through strategic partnerships rather than direct confrontation. Everyone benefits. Rizzo said he'd pass the information along. Second call, Danny Iamashia. One of Dutch Schultz's other lieutenants. Ambitious. Resentful of Bo Weinberg's rapid rise to top enforcer. Stephanie had cultivated this resentment carefully over 6 months through intermediaries, planted suggestions, strategic rumors. Through a careful intermediary, Danny received information. Bo Weinberg had been skimming from collections. Would be at the 142nd Street warehouse tonight with evidence. If someone wanted to catch him red-handed, prove his betrayal to Schultz, this was the opportunity. The pieces were moving. Hours 12 to 15, the alibi. 9 p.m. Stephanie dressed for the Cotton Club. Burgundy silk gown. Pearls. Hair perfectly styled. She looked like she was preparing for an elegant evening, not orchestrating a disappearance. 10 p.m. She arrived at the Cotton Club on 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue, Harlem's most famous nightclub, where Duke Ellington played and Harlem's elite gathered. Her table was prominent. Center floor. Perfect visibility. By 10:30 p.m., 12 people sat with her. Charles Wright, funeral home owner and community board member, Councilman Robert Dixon and his wife, Captain Gerald Morrison from the 28th Precinct, various Harlem business leaders and socialites. All respectable. All credible witnesses. Stephanie laughed at jokes. Ordered champagne. Discussed business opportunities. Asked Captain Morrison about his daughter's upcoming wedding. She was charming, relaxed, completely visible. At midnight, Duke Ellington's orchestra played Sophisticated Lady. Stephanie danced with Charles Wright. Smiled appropriately. Maintained perfect composure. At 2:30 a.m. she excused herself briefly. Walked to the lobby. Made one phone call. 3 words, it's time. She returned to her table. ordered another bottle of champagne. At 2:45 a.m., while Stephanie St. Clair sat surrounded by Harlem's most prominent citizens in the Cotton Club's bright lights, three separate groups began moving toward the same warehouse on 142nd Street. Each believed they were there for different reasons. None of them knew they were all pieces on a board Stephanie had been arranging since 12:30 that afternoon. The clock reached 3 a.m. 15 hours had passed since the church steps humiliation. 17 minutes remained until Bo Weinberg's world ended. July 18, 1933. 8 p.m. through July 19, 2:45 a.m. 5 threads. 5 separate narratives. All moving toward the same point in space and time. A warehouse on 142nd Street between Lenox and 7th Avenue, 3:17 a.m. Stephanie St. Clair had spent 15 hours weaving them together. Now they would tighten. Thread 1, the enforcer. 8 p.m. Bo Weinberg sat in Murphy's Speakeasy on 125th Street, 3 whiskeys deep, feeling invincible. The speakeasy occupied a basement beneath a barber shop. Sawdust floors. Exposed brick. Illegal liquor flowing despite Prohibition's best efforts. The kind of place where men discussed business that couldn't be discussed in daylight. Weinberg held court at a corner table. 6 of Schultz's men around him, listening to him recount the morning's church steps confrontation for the 4th time. "You should have seen her face," Weinberg said, gesturing with his glass. Stone silent. Couldn't even respond. Just stood there like a scared little girl who finally understands she's playing in the wrong league. His men laughed on cue. Raised their glasses. Toasted their boss's dominance. What Weinberg didn't notice, 3 men at the bar weren't laughing. They watched him carefully, faces neutral, drinks untouched. They worked for Tony Borello. And they were taking mental notes. 11:30 p.m. Weinberg left Murphy's, drunk but functional. The July heat had broken into a cooler evening. He walked 3 blocks to his apartment on West 48th Street, 2 of his men trailing behind for security. Inside his apartment, modest by his standards, he spent money on clothes and liquor, not furniture. Weinberg collapsed on his bed fully dressed. Sleep came quickly. The sleep of a man who believed he'd won. 1:45 a.m. The bedside telephone rang. Weinberg fumbled for it, groggy. "Yeah. Mr. Weinberg." The voice was unfamiliar. Nervous. "Yeah. You don't know me, but I got information. About Stephanie St. Clair. About a big collection happening tonight." Weinberg sat up, suddenly alert. "What collection?" "She's moving a week's worth of numbers money. All the runners bringing their take to a warehouse on 142nd Street. Should be $15,000, maybe $20,000. They're meeting at 3 a.m. to count and divide it." Weinberg's eyes narrowed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of working for a woman. Because Mr. Schultz pays better. Because I want to be on the winning side." The voice sounded genuine. Desperate. Exactly like a betrayer trying to buy his way into a new organization. "Where on 142nd? Between Lenox and 7th. Old textile warehouse. Red door. They'll be in the back room. You better not be wasting my time." "I'm not, Mr. Weinberg. I swear. I just want a job when this is over." Weinberg hung up. Sat in darkness thinking. $15,000 to $20,000. Stephanie's entire week's operation in one place. If he seized it, he wouldn't just embarrass her, he'd cripple her financially. Force her runners to question whether she could protect them. Accelerate her collapse. The opportunity was too perfect. Which should have made him suspicious. But whiskey and ego are poor counselors. 2:15 a.m. Weinberg called 3 of his men. Told them to meet him on 142nd Street. "Bring weapons. Easy work," he said. Like taking candy from a scared woman. They met at 2:35 a.m. 4 men total. Armed. Confident. They walked toward the warehouse with the red door. Bo Weinberg had no idea he was walking into a convergence point Stephanie St. Clair had been engineering for 15 hours. Thread 2, the Italian debt. 9:30 p.m. Tony Borello sat in the back room of his social club on 116th Street in East Harlem, smoking a cigar, playing cards with 3 of his cousins. Borello was 42 years old. Second-generation Italian, born in New York but raised with old country values. Family, honor, respect, and the understanding that debts, financial and blood, always got paid eventually. Bo Weinberg owed him both. 6 months ago, February 1933, Weinberg and 4 of Schultz's men had ambushed one of Borello's collection operations. Took $4,000. Beat Borello's nephew, Sal, badly enough that the kid's jaw had to be wired shut for 8 weeks. Borello had wanted immediate retaliation. His cousins had counseled patience. Going after Schultz's top enforcer meant war with Schultz. War was expensive, unpredictable, bad for business. So Borello had waited. Nursed his anger. Bided his time. 10:45 p.m. Anthony Rizzo walked into the social club. Rizzo worked for the Genovese family but maintained friendly relations with independent operators like Borello. Useful bridges in a fractured underworld. Tony. Got something for you. Rizzo sat down, declined the offered cigar. About Bo Weinberg. Borello's eyes sharpened. I'm listening. He's going to be vulnerable tonight. Very vulnerable. 142nd Street warehouse between Lenox and 7th. Around 3 a.m. He'll have maybe 2-3 men. He'll be distracted, not expecting trouble. How do you know this? Rizzo smiled slightly. A mutual friend provided the information. Someone who has reasons to want Weinberg off the board. Someone smart enough not to get her own hands dirty. Borello understood immediately. Stephanie St. Clair. The church steps insult was already all over Harlem. Why would she tell you? Because she knows you have your own score to settle. Because this way, when Weinberg disappears, suspicion falls in multiple directions. And because she prefers elegant solutions. Borello considered. It felt like manipulation. It was manipulation. But manipulation that served his purposes perfectly. Sal, he called to his nephew, whose jaw had healed but whose memory of the beating hadn't. Get your brothers. We're going to 142nd Street tonight. Bring what you need. Sal's eyes lit with something cold and patient. They left the social club at 2:50 a.m. 6 men. 2 cars. Tony Borello wasn't going for Stephanie St. Clair's benefit. He was going because Bo Weinberg owed him $4,000 in blood, and debts got paid. That Stephanie had arranged the opportunity was just smart business. Thread 3, The Ambitious Rival. 11 p.m. Danny Iamashia drank coffee in an all-night diner on Amsterdam Avenue, waiting for his contact. Iamashia was 31. Sharp dresser. Sharper mind. He'd been with Dutch Schultz for 6 years, working his way up from street collections to managing entire territories. He'd earned his position through competence, reliability, and ruthless efficiency when required. But he wasn't top lieutenant. That position belonged to Bo Weinberg. It ate at him. Weinberg was newer, younger, more reckless. Got promoted because he was willing to be more brutal than anyone else, not because he was smart. Danny Iamashia was smart. And ambition, properly channeled, could overcome favoritism. 11:30 p.m. A man slid into the booth across from him. Small-time operator named Mickey Roth who worked the fringes of multiple organizations, passing information, making connections. You said you had something, Iamashia said. Mickey leaned close. Bo Weinberg's been skimming. Iamashia's expression didn't change. Proof? He's moving money tonight that's not in the books. Meeting at a warehouse on 142nd Street around 3 a.m. If you caught him there with cash that doesn't match his reported collections. Mickey shrugged. That's the kind of thing Mr. Schultz would want to know about. Who told you this? Does it matter? You want to be Schultz's number one, or you want to ask questions while Weinberg keeps taking what should be yours? Iamashia thought through the angles. If Weinberg was skimming and Danny exposed it, Schultz's trust would shift. Opportunities would open. The top position would be within reach. If Weinberg wasn't skimming and this was a setup, well, Danny could play it as diligent oversight. Protecting the boss's interests. Low risk, high reward. Where on 142nd? Mickey told him. 1:30 a.m. Iamashia gathered 5 of his most loyal men. Told them they were checking on a potential problem. Bring weapons but use restraint. This might be internal discipline, not external war. They drove to Harlem in 2 cars, arriving at 142nd Street at 3:10 a.m. Danny Iamashia believed he was catching a thief and advancing his career. He had no idea he was a piece in someone else's game. Thread 4, The Perfect Alibi. 10 p.m. Stephanie St. Clair entered the Cotton Club wearing burgundy silk and confidence. The Cotton Club on 142nd and Lenox, Harlem's most famous nightclub, where white audiences came to watch black performers and pretend they were sophisticated. Owned by white gangsters but staffed by Harlem's best. Duke Ellington's orchestra, the finest dancers, the most elegant atmosphere. Stephanie's table was center floor. Maximum visibility. By 10:30 p.m., 12 witnesses surrounded her. Councilman Dixon and his wife discussing the new community center proposal. Captain Morrison from the 28th Precinct talking about his daughter's wedding. Charles Wright describing a recent funeral for one of Harlem's elders. Socialites, business leaders, respected citizens. All of them would remember exactly where Stephanie St. Clair was tonight. She laughed at appropriate moments. Ordered champagne. Discussed property investments on Strivers Row. Asked Captain Morrison if the precinct needed additional support for the upcoming church fundraiser. She was charming, gracious, completely engaged, and calculating every minute. Midnight. Duke Ellington played Sophisticated Lady. Charles Wright asked her to dance. Stephanie accepted, gliding across the floor with practiced elegance. They moved past other tables, other dancers, visible to everyone in the packed nightclub. "You seem particularly radiant tonight, Mississippi St. Clair," Wright said. "It's been a good day, Charles." "A very good day." 1 a.m. Back at the table, more champagne, more conversation. Captain Morrison told a story about a rookie cop who'd accidentally arrested a judge's nephew. Everyone laughed. Stephanie checked her watch discreetly. 2 hours and 17 minutes. 2:15 a.m. She excused herself. "Ladies' room," she said with an apologetic smile. She walked through the crowded club, still visible to dozens of people, to the lobby. The Cotton Club's manager nodded respectfully as she passed. In the lobby she used the telephone. One call. Brief. "It's time." She returned to her table within 3 minutes. Captain Morrison was midway through another story. She slid back into her seat seamlessly, picked up her champagne glass. "You didn't miss much," Dixon's wife whispered with a smile. "I'm sure I didn't," Stephanie replied. 2:45 a.m. The orchestra played on. Stephanie ordered another bottle of champagne. Raised her glass in a toast. "To Harlem," she said. "And to all of us who protect it." 12 glasses rose. 12 witnesses clinked crystal. 12 people who would testify under oath that Stephanie St. Clair was at the Cotton Club all evening, surrounded by Harlem's most respectable citizens. Including a police captain. 2:50 a.m. 3 miles away, 3 separate groups moved toward 142nd Street. Stephanie sipped her champagne and smiled. Thread 5, the convergence. 2:45 a.m. The warehouse on 142nd Street sat dark and silent. 3 stories. Red brick. Old textile manufacturing facility that had closed during the Depression. Now used occasionally for illegal card games, storage, meetings that needed privacy. Perfect location for what was about to happen. 2:50 a.m. Bo Weinberg arrived with his 3 men. They approached the red door cautiously. Weinberg's whiskey confidence had burned off during the walk. His instincts, dulled but not dead, whispered warnings. "Stay sharp," he told his men. Could be nothing. Could be a setup. They entered. The ground floor was empty. Boxes. Old machinery. No money. No runners. "Check the back room," Weinberg ordered. 3:05 a.m. Tony Borello's 2 cars pulled up 1 block away. 6 men emerged. Sal Borello carried a baseball bat. His brothers carried worse. They'd waited 6 months. They weren't rushing now. 3:10 a.m. Danny Iamashia's cars arrived from the opposite direction. 5 men, weapons concealed but ready. Iamashia saw Weinberg's men entering the warehouse. Perfect. Catching him in the act. "Let's see what Bo's up to," Iamashia said. Inside the warehouse, Bo Weinberg found the back room empty. No money. No runners. Just darkness and the growing certainty that he'd been played. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." They turned toward the exit. The door crashed open. Tony Borello's men entered from one side. Danny Iamashia's crew from the other. For one frozen second, everyone stared at everyone else, confused about why so many people were in the same place at the same time. Then Sal Borello recognized Bo Weinberg. "That's him." Sal shouted. "That's the bastard who broke my jaw." Weinberg's hand went for his gun. Everything exploded. At the Cotton Club, Stephanie St. Clair checked her watch. 3:15 a.m. She smiled softly and returned her attention to Councilman Dixon's story about municipal zoning regulations. Her expression revealed nothing at all. July 19, 1933. 2:50 a.m. through 3:45 a.m. 2 locations. 2 timelines. 1 ending. Timeline A, the warehouse, 142nd Street. 2:55 a.m. Bo Weinberg stood in the empty warehouse back room, the silence pressing against his ears like water. No runners. No money. No numbers operation. Just darkness and the sinking realization that he'd been set up. Weinberg's hand went for his gun. Everything exploded. At the Cotton Club, Stephanie St. Clair checked her watch. 3:15 a.m. She smiled softly and returned her attention to Councilman Dixon's story about municipal zoning regulations. Her expression revealed nothing at all. July 19, 1933. 2:50 a.m. through 3:45 a.m. 2 locations. 2 timelines. 1 ending. Timeline A, The Warehouse, 142nd Street. 2:55 a.m. Bo Weinberg stood in the empty warehouse back room, the silence pressing against his ears like water. No runners. No money. No numbers operation. Just darkness and the sinking realization that he'd been set up. His 3 men shifted nervously. Even they could feel it, the wrongness in the air, the sense that they'd walked into something they didn't understand. "Boss, we should go," one of them said. Young kid, maybe 22. Smart enough to trust his instincts. The footsteps stopped beside him. What happened in the next 90 seconds would never be fully documented. No witnesses would come forward. No definitive evidence would emerge. By 3:30 a.m. Bo Weinberg was dead in a Harlem alley. The men who'd been in that warehouse, those who survived, would scatter. Would tell contradicting stories. Would point fingers in multiple directions. Police would find 5 different suspects. 10 different motives. 0 clear narrative. And absolutely nothing connecting any of it to a woman who'd spent the entire evening at the Cotton Club, surrounded by Harlem's most respectable citizens. Timeline B, The Cotton Club. 3:10 a.m. Stephanie St. Clair sipped champagne and listened to Councilman Dixon's wife describe their recent anniversary trip to Atlantic City. "The boardwalk was beautiful," Mrs. Dixon said. "But the restaurants, you wouldn't believe the prices they charge tourists." Stephanie smiled. Atlantic City has always understood how to separate visitors from their money. Captain Morrison laughed. "Unlike Harlem, which is a model of fair pricing. In Harlem," Stephanie said smoothly, "we take care of our own." 3:15 a.m. A waiter approached the table. Leaned close to Stephanie. Whispered something inaudible to the other guests. Stephanie nodded. "Excuse me for just one moment. A business matter." She walked to the lobby. Still visible to half the club. Still clearly inside the Cotton Club, nowhere near 142nd Street. The lobby telephone sat on the manager's desk. She picked up the receiver. "Yes." A voice on the other end, one of her runners positioned 3 blocks from the warehouse, said one word, "Done." Stephanie's expression didn't change. "Thank you." She hung up. Returned to her table. Mrs. Dixon was showing photographs from Atlantic City. Stephanie admired them with appropriate enthusiasm. "You should visit sometime, Mississippi St. Clair," Mrs. Dixon said. "Perhaps I will. Though I find Harlem provides all the entertainment I need." 3:25 a.m. Duke Ellington's orchestra played Mood Indigo. The Cotton Club's energy had shifted to that late-night, early-morning atmosphere, conversations more intimate, laughter more subdued, the sense that the evening was winding toward dawn. Stephanie raised her champagne glass. "A toast," she said. "To Harlem. To community. To protecting what's ours." 12 glasses rose. 12 witnesses clinked crystal. "To Harlem," they echoed. Stephanie sipped her champagne and allowed herself the smallest smile. Not triumph. Not joy. Just the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved elegantly, without her fingerprints anywhere near the solution. Bo Weinberg had humiliated her on church steps 15 hours and 38 minutes ago. He'd been gone for 8 minutes. And when the sun rose over Harlem in 2 hours, Stephanie St. Clair would wake in her Sugar Hill apartment, read the morning papers, attend to her business as always. Bo Weinberg's body wouldn't be discovered for 3 more days. And when it was, the investigation would lead everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. 3:45 a.m. The evening wound down. Guests began departing. Captain Morrison helped his wife with her coat. Councilman Dixon settled the bill, though Stephanie had already quietly arranged for it to be covered. "Wonderful evening, Mississippi St. Clair," Morrison said, shaking her hand at the door. "We should do this more often." "Absolutely, Captain. I believe strongly in community relationships." She stepped out into the pre-dawn Harlem air. Her Cadillac waited at the curb. Marcus held the door open. She slid into the back seat. The door closed. The Cadillac pulled away from the Cotton Club, moving through empty Harlem streets toward Sugar Hill. Inside, finally alone, Stephanie allowed herself one deep breath. Then she opened her handbag. Removed her small leather notebook. Found the page from this afternoon. Bo Weinberg. July 18, 11:47 a.m. Public insult, church steps. She drew one clean line through his name, closed the notebook, returned it to her bag. Outside, the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. A new day, a solved problem, and a lesson delivered to anyone who thought Stephanie St. Clair could be humiliated into submission. The Cadillac turned onto Edgecombe Avenue. Harlem slept, unaware that one of its most dangerous threats had been eliminated without a single shot fired by the woman he'd underestimated. By intelligence, by strategy, by understanding that real power didn't announce itself on church steps. It worked in silence, and struck with precision. Always. July 22, 1933. 6:47 a.m. A sanitation worker found Bo Weinberg's body in an alley off 143rd Street, 3 blocks from the warehouse where everything had gone wrong. The body had been there for 3 days. July heat hadn't been kind. NYPD detectives from the 32nd Precinct arrived by 7:30 a.m. They photographed the scene, documented a gunshot wound to the shoulder and what appeared to be fatal injuries to the head and chest. Multiple shooters, they concluded. Professional work, or at least professional enough. By 9 a.m., they'd identified the body through fingerprints on file from Weinberg's 1927 assault arrest. By 10 a.m. they'd begun investigating. The investigation would last exactly 4 days and produce absolutely nothing useful. Detective Frank Sullivan conducted the interviews. 23 years on the force, 15 of them in Harlem. He'd seen enough mob violence to recognize a setup when he encountered one. And Bo Weinberg's death was a setup of extraordinary sophistication. First interview, Tony Borello. Alibi rock solid. Playing cards at his social club in East Harlem with 12 witnesses including 2 off-duty cops. Never left all night. Did you have any problems with Bo Weinberg? Sullivan asked. Borello shrugged. I heard he was Dutch Schultz's guy. I don't do business with Schultz's people. Bad for health. He robbed one of your operations 6 months ago. Did he? News to me. Maybe you should ask Schultz about his employees' activities. Dead end. Second interview, Danny Iamashia. Also had an alibi, visiting his mother in the Bronx, stayed overnight, neighbors confirmed. Weinberg worked for the same boss you do. Any conflicts? Iamashia's face showed appropriate shock. Bo was top lieutenant. I respected him. We all did. This is a tragedy for Mr. Schultz's organization. Any idea who might want him dead? Detective Bo was an enforcer. That line of work makes enemies. Could be anyone. Another dead end. Third interview, Stephanie St. Clair. Sullivan arrived at 409 Edgecombe Avenue on July 23, 2 p.m. The doorman announced him. He rode the elevator to the 6th floor, was shown into an elegant office overlooking Harlem. Stephanie sat behind her mahogany desk, wearing a cream-colored dress and pearls. She looked composed, professional, completely unsurprised by his visit. Detective Sullivan. How can I help you? Bo Weinberg. Dutch Schultz's enforcer. Found dead 3 days ago. You knew him? I'd heard the name. Harlem's a small community, detective. Word travels. He confronted you. July 18th. Outside Abyssinian Baptist Church. 200 witnesses. Stephanie's expression didn't change. He spoke to me, yes. Briefly. Made some suggestions about my business operations. I declined his offer. What happened after that? I went home. Then to the Cotton Club that evening. A lovely night, actually. Councilman Dixon was there, Captain Morrison from the 28th Precinct, several community leaders. We had champagne, listened to Duke Ellington. I left around 3:45 a.m. Sullivan consulted his notes. He'd already verified this. 12 witnesses confirmed Stephanie St. Clair's presence at the Cotton Club from 10 p.m. until nearly 4 a.m., including a police captain. You were at the Cotton Club the entire time? Yes, detective. The entire time. Surrounded by Harlem's most respectable citizens. Sullivan looked at her for a long moment. She met his gaze calmly, patiently, with the expression of someone who had nothing to hide and all the time in the world. He knew. She knew he knew. And they both knew he couldn't prove a single thing. Thank you for your time, Mississippi St. Clair. Always happy to assist the police, detective. July 26th. The investigation officially stalled. 5 different suspects. 10 different motives. Witnesses who contradicted each other. Physical evidence that pointed everywhere and nowhere. The warehouse on 142nd Street had been wiped clean. No useful fingerprints. No shell casings that could be definitively traced. Just blood and bullet holes that told a story of chaos but not causation. Detective Sullivan wrote in his final report, Multiple parties involved. Motive unclear. Evidence insufficient for prosecution. Case remains open pending new information. Translation: everyone knew it was a setup, nobody could prove who orchestrated it, and nobody wanted to dig deeper because the answers might be worse than the questions. The file went into a cabinet. Bo Weinberg became a statistic. Another body in a city that produced plenty of them. But Harlem knew. The story spread through Lenox Avenue speakeasies, 135th Street barbershops, Small's Paradise, the Cotton Club, church gatherings, numbers parlors. Whispered conversations that became common knowledge within 48 hours. Bo Weinberg had insulted Stephanie St. Clair on Sunday morning. By Tuesday night he was dead. And Madame St. Clair had been at the Cotton Club all evening, surrounded by witnesses, nowhere near the violence. The details remained murky, who actually pulled triggers, whose bullets hit what, but the architecture was unmistakable. Stephanie St. Clair had orchestrated Bo Weinberg's disappearance without firing a shot, without being present, without leaving a single piece of evidence connecting her to the outcome. Intelligence over violence. Strategy over brute force. The long game over immediate retaliation. The story became legend. Marcus Williams, Stephanie's driver who'd been at the church, told everyone who'd listen. She didn't even raise her voice. Just said 5 words and went home. 15 hours later, problem solved. The message rippled through Harlem's underworld. Do not underestimate Stephanie St. Clair. Do not dismiss her because she's a woman. Do not mistake her calm for weakness. She played a different game. A smarter game. And if you challenged her publicly, you might disappear quietly. Dutch Schultz's reaction came on July 28. He called a meeting of his remaining lieutenants. Danny Iamashia attended, now effectively promoted to top enforcer by virtue of Weinberg's absence. Harlem, Schultz said, pacing his Bronx office, is more complicated than I thought. Understatement of the decade. Schultz knew Stephanie had orchestrated Weinberg's death. Couldn't prove it. Couldn't retaliate without evidence. Couldn't even complain publicly without looking weak, admitting his top enforcer had been outsmarted by a woman he tried to intimidate. We're pulling back from Harlem operations, Schultz announced. Temporarily. Until we reassess strategy. Translation: Stephanie St. Clair had won. The war that had simmered since 1931 shifted decisively in her favor. Schultz's expansion stalled. His operations became more cautious, less aggressive. Within 18 months, his attention would drift elsewhere, to labor racketeering, to battles with Thomas Dewey, to the cascading problems that came from being too visible, too arrogant, too violent. On October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz would be gunned down in a Newark chophouse. Stephanie St. Clair allegedly sent a telegram to his hospital bed, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." Whether she actually sent it or whether it became apocryphal legend didn't matter. People believed she did. Which was just as powerful. In Harlem, Stephanie's reputation reached new heights. Other operators, white and black, reassessed their strategies. The Italian families developed new respect for her tactical brilliance. Independent operators sought alliances rather than conflicts. Bo Weinberg's disappearance became a case study in strategic genius. Business schools would never teach it, but Harlem's underground university understood perfectly. Intelligence defeats force, patience defeats aggression, and strategic thinking defeats everything else. Stephanie continued her operations through the 1930s and 1940s. Fought more battles. Won most of them. Used the same methods: information networks, legal warfare, media exposure, strategic alliances. She employed Bumpy Johnson, who learned from her and eventually became Harlem's most famous gangster. But he started as her student, her enforcer, her employee. She married Sufi Abdul Hamid in the late 1930s, a complicated, ultimately tragic relationship that ended in violence and her brief imprisonment. Even then, she navigated the legal system with characteristic intelligence, served minimal time, emerged with her operations intact. She semi-retired in the 1960s as Harlem changed, as the numbers racket consolidated under larger organizations, as the world she'd built transformed into something different. She died in 1969, 83 years old, in her own bed at 409 Edgecombe Avenue. Not in an alley. Not in prison. Not broken by the forces that had tried for decades to destroy her. History tried to erase Stephanie St. Clair. Tried to reduce her to footnote. To female gangster curiosity. To the woman who worked for Bumpy Johnson instead of the woman who employed him. Tried to erase the Caribbean immigrant who built an empire through brilliance, who protected Harlem when nobody else would, who proved that strategic intelligence could defeat every form of discrimination, violence, and institutional oppression simultaneously. But her legacy survived in the stories, in the memories of families she helped during the Depression, in the tradition of strategic thinking she established, in the proof that a Black Caribbean woman could outmaneuver the most feared enforcers in New York's underworld. Bo Weinberg's mistake was thinking power came from public displays of dominance, from humiliation, from forcing others to submit through threats and violence. Stephanie St. Clair understood that real power was quieter, smarter, more patient. It didn't announce itself on church steps. It worked in silence, arranged pieces carefully, and struck with precision when the moment was right. Bo Weinberg thought he was delivering an insult. He was actually activating his own ending. 15 hours and 30 minutes later, he was gone. And the woman he'd called just a woman playing at men's games continued building her empire for another 36 years. That's the difference between force and intelligence. That's the difference between arrogance and strategy. That's the lesson Harlem never forgot. And that's why Stephanie St. Clair's story matters. Not because she was violent, because she was brilliant. Not because she matched men's brutality, because she exceeded their intelligence. Not because she played their game, because she invented a better one, and won, always.